and I'd like to thank all the organizers for inviting me to be part of this discussion. Let me begin. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves at a time of crisis, and let me begin by quoting someone else who found himself at a time of crisis. He said, "The disposition to admire and almost worship the rich and powerful, and to despise or at least to neglect persons of poor and mean condition, is the great and most universal cause of the corruption of our moral sentiments." This was said by Adam Smith at the end of the 18th century. And I think that given the level of global inequality, we do well to heed Adam Smith's warning. The promise of the end of the colonial era was that countries of the South would be free to develop economic systems that would serve the needs of the entire population and not only those of a handful of super elites. But this has not been the case. Cold War and neo-colonial politics, including hot wars in many parts of Asia, Latin America, and Africa, locked most southern countries into a model of development which has and continues to be a failure. Neoliberalism, prevalent since the 90s and even before, has made the situation worse, with inequality going to extremes. The result is a system that echoes the old colonial order. Commodities are extracted, sold cheaply and often without being taxed, to international markets for processing and value addition, and then resold sometimes to the same country in which the raw materials originated. This is nearly the exact pattern that allowed 19th century British industrialists to become so powerful, while the Indian farmers who provided them with cotton starved. The exploitation of cheap natural resources and labor, combined with the particular exploitation of women, who continue to bear a disproportionate burden of poverty and rights violations, continues. The solution for this commodities trap is clear. Invest in manufacturing to create more jobs and, not coincidentally, more consumers, and provide social protection so that people can recognize their right to health, education, food, and housing. So the question naturally, and the question before all of us, is where will the money to do this come from? There are many answers, but one of them must surely be to go after the money that is already there, namely the companies that are already operating in our countries, often in the extractive industries, and often not paying their fair share of tax. Estimates vary, but it seems likely that ending tax avoidance and harmful incentive schemes could generate $300 billion a year for developing countries. I'll also mention the figure of the African Union Illicit Financial Flows Panel, which estimates that about 50 billion is extracted from, or it leaves Africa in illicit flows every year, and about half of that is coming from tax dodging. This is roughly double, the $300 billion figure is roughly double OECD estimates of global aid to developing countries. Because of loopholes and pervasive secrecy, even countries that have the temerity to seek to collect taxes from transnational companies find that they lack the power to do so. And it is here that we get to the question of what agreements would be most likely to bear fruit for the Addis Conference and the Financing for Development process. Transparency and public reporting on tax matters are a start, and double taxation treaties need to be written and implemented so as not to allow loopholes for getting money out untaxed, but rather to provide sustainable revenues of funding for high-quality investment for the needs of poor people. But the last 30 years have shown that it's the height of naivety to expect that all companies will voluntarily do anything that might limit their ability to extract profit in the short term. So the solution does not lie in new voluntary guidelines or developing best practice. It lies in changing the legal and the regulatory framework. While other processes, including the OECD, BEPS, G20 process, might be part of the solution, the UN system has to play a central role because these other processes are explicitly created by and driven by the needs and interests of richer countries. Upgrading the UN Tax Committee to an intergovernmental committee might be a step in the right direction, but it is clearly not enough. We need a new agreement or a convention that both mandates and provides funding for sustainable development that favors the poorest, women, children, and men. And we need a new mechanism to go after tax dodgers. If we do not tackle this question of taxing international capital in developing countries, we have no business talking about domestic resource mobilization at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samir.